One sure way to start up the rage of certain Trails fans is by defending the character Alisa from the Trails of Cold Steel path. So that's what this entire video will be doing. Bring on the ire! Or fire, whichever you prefer. For those who are unsure as to what the Trails of Cold Steel games are, check out the video I made on it. And a warning that there will absolutely be spoilers for Trails of Cold Steel 1 in this video. You have been warned. It's time to dive into why Alisa deserves greater slack than she is given by many fans. Alisa gets off on the wrong foot with many fans early on by being very generic as the main love interest of the main character, Reen Schwarzer. Her early interactions with Reen could absolutely be categorized as typical anime couple setup. She literally walks into him. Later, there's a misunderstanding that leads to her slapping him, and she acts very cold to him while also showing growing signs of feelings throughout the game. It's no wonder she's called a tsundere by the fanbase. That second part, the misunderstanding, is considered the worst of these moments, and that moment will be my focus for most of the video, but I will also address why her behavior afterwards when wrestling with her feelings also fits her character. The Trails series is known for having long developing storylines and early character interactions that only become as deep and notable as they are later on in the story. The Trails series also loves taking character tropes and exploring them deeper than they have in other games, shows, or movies. I have no grand explanation for why the first meeting between Reen and Alisa is so cliché. The reason to me seems to be that they needed to establish some sort of connection between Reen and Alisa at the beginning to explain Reen's later action of trying to save her when they fall into the pit. She is the first person he really talks to among Class 7, and that desire for connection is common when starting in a new location. That is the reason I think for their meeting, although it could have been done differently. It mostly reflects the needs of the storyteller. That scene does not serve to give an indication of character for either Reen or Alisa. The second scene, the infamous accidental face full of boobs, changes things and gives the player the first glimpse of Alisa as a character. This trope of guy getting into awkward position with girl he just met, who then reacts violently towards him, is an incredibly popular trope in JRPGs, including the recent games such as Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Valkyria Chronicles 4. So at least Trails of Cold Steel is not the first nor the last to go about this route. But its continued usage makes it understandable that people could be tired of it. I want to ask the question though, why does Alisa react this way? Beyond just the comedic moment for the audience, why would Alisa slap Reen and for weeks afterwards be cold and huffy towards him? The reason for me lies in Alisa's upbringing and personality that causes her to make assumptions about Reen, and as her assumptions are shaken, make it difficult for her to own up to her mistake. I'm going to go into a bit of psychology on this one. As we grow up, we are constantly learning from the people around us about many things. From language in our early days to societal norms, we engage in mimetic learning, where we gain knowledge by imitating the actions of those around us. It's why our parents are such a critical aspect of our psychological development, because they, and any adult we interact with as kids, are the examples we see on a consistent basis. Behaviors, neuroses, and anxieties can be linked back to childhood trauma or experiences because it is such a formative time for any individual. What then can we learn about Alisa through her childhood? She grew up fairly sheltered. She states she had few friends because she was treated differently by the nobles, who looked down on her, and by the commoners, who saw her as different because of her family's wealthy status. Her major examples in life, then, are fairly limited because of the sheltered existence and mostly consist of family. Her father died 8 years prior to the events of Cold Steel 1, and in Cold Steel 1, Alisa is 17, which means he died when she was 9. Her grandfather left 3 years after that, and while he kept writing to her over the 5 years since, she hasn't seen him in person until her field study trip to Nord leads them to run into each other. Her mother, of course, was a constant presence, and then there's Sharon, who was hired not long after Alisa's father died. Now, I'm going to take this information and talk about how each part continues to influence her behavior years afterwards. Firstly, Alisa is not particularly socially skilled or knowledgeable. She simply hasn't had the opportunity because of her outsider status among the nobility and commoners. Class 7 may be the first place she feels she belongs because it's a diverse group in background and class, making her stick out far less. Her social development, though, seems better with the girls than the boys, and I attribute that to her relationship with Sharon. Their relationship has led Alisa to be more comfortable with female friendship because she has had at least one friend of that kind in Sharon. Boys, however, are a whole nother picture. As I said before, Alisa's dad died when she was 9. Now, psychologists are not sure about this, but evidence points to the early period of puberty as a critical learning point about romantic relationships. Why is it important that Alisa's dad died just at the start of that period? Well, it means that there was only one major male role model in Alisa's life. The man who would model how every man behaves in young Alisa's mind. The man who sets the standard for what she should expect from potential friendships or relationships with guys. Some of you can clearly see where I'm going with this, but the fact that Gwyn Rhineford is the model for Alisa's expectations when it comes to boys is perhaps the most compelling evidence I can think of for Alisa's reaction to Reen. Gwyn is quite a suggestive person, and that's putting it about as mildly as I can. He has no issue making comments about women around him. In his first conversation with his granddaughter in 5 years, in person at least, he makes a very clear reference to how her breasts have grown. He routinely flirts with women 50 to 60 years his junior. And well, let's face it, if Gwyn was a CEO in these times, he wouldn't hold that position for long. I will reiterate for those in the back that Alisa learned as she was growing up that how Gwyn acted around women was normal and the expectation. But it seems Alisa also feels quite uncomfortable with that, understandably. Her very embarrassed reactions to any comment of her grandfather's indicates that. However, Alisa still thinks subconsciously that every boy and man acts like Gwyn, including our unfortunate Reen, who ended up in said compromising situation. Think about it. If Reen did have the personality of Gwyn in that situation, it would be quite reasonable to think he had set it up on purpose to get up and personal. Alisa certainly thinks so, and that is why she reacts the way she does and slaps him without waiting for an explanation. Hopefully that makes sense, because I'm going to be moving on to the aftermath of that moment, and why it takes so long for Alisa to apologize and recognize that Reen is a good guy. I've established why Alisa slapped Reen, but that's only half of the reason Alisa is given a hard time by some. The other half is her behavior afterwards, acting haughty and cold towards Reen for weeks afterwards. This behavior persists even though she shows signs quite early on that she feels bad for the way she reacted and wants to apologize, especially as she learns what a good guy Reen really is. Well, here's where the next part of her childhood psychological development comes in. If Gwyn is Alisa's model for how men should act, who is her model for how women should act? That would be Irina Rhineford, her mother, the chairman of the Rhineford Company. From the earliest possible moment, we realize that Irina is a competent workaholic whose emotions are somewhere between cold and freezing. She is a powerful businesswoman who prides herself on her steely demeanor, and she does not let any sentimentality into her life. Alisa, despite her complicated relationship with her mother, is unconsciously trying to emulate that when she begins her time at Thor's. She is hardworking as well, like her mother, but she can't shove her emotions away the same way her mom does. Being a teenager is an emotionally turbulent time, but Alisa, instead of embracing those emotions, is trying to hide from them. That is why I think she had so much difficulty apologizing to Reen. She was working through years of repression, not to mention years of thinking that all guys were perverts. Alisa was only going to get to the point of apologizing to Reen if she got in touch with her own feelings instead of running from them. Irina wouldn't apologize or show she was at fault in any way. We know this because that's how she acts in game, even when confronted with her mistakes. Alisa cannot and should not follow that path, and to her credit, she manages to deviate, but it's understandable that it takes some time for her to do so. One of the most impressive things I find about Alisa is that her background issues are overcome through her quick development of friendships and emotional maturity. She overcame years of psychological messages counter to healthy practices in a few weeks. There are vestiges of her issues all throughout the series, but Alisa is mentally tough for forging her own path. That may seem unrealistic though to people. How could she possibly make herself emotionally vulnerable and establish close relationships with her male friends given her family's negative influence on her? That answer lies in the last influential person in her life growing up, Sharon Kruger. Sharon clearly cares a lot for Alisa. She is her oldest friend and is always looking out for her well-being. She also loves to tease Alisa, which is extremely important for Alisa's emotional development. Sharon knows Alisa well enough to know what she is thinking and feeling at any given moment, and by teasing her, she gets Alisa to show her emotions. And once they've been shown, she can't ignore them anymore. Sharon makes Alisa confront her feelings towards her family, towards Thors, and of course, towards Reen. By drawing Alisa out of her shell, Sharon does more than either Irina or Gwyn towards making Alisa a functioning person. Alisa was taking steps in the right direction prior to Sharon arriving with Class 7, but Sharon helped accelerate the process and presumably helped for years prior to the game's beginning. Just to recap, my argument then for why Alisa deserves more slack than she gets. Her slapping of Reen after the incident in the old schoolhouse is what one would expect if a girl assumed all guys were perverts, which is what Gwyn taught her with his behavior. Her cold behavior afterwards was consistent with what she was taught a woman should behave like, because that emotionless, unapologetic behavior is exactly how her mother acts. And finally, the fact that she managed to overcome both of those bad influences to apologize and establish a friendship with Reen is a sign of both her emotional strength and the positive influence of Sharon Kruger in her life. In short, the amazing writers over at Falcom do it once again, bringing in nuance and strong characterization to a somewhat overdone trope. I hope my argument was persuasive. If it was, give a like to the video, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and feel free to share the video around. If you still don't agree with me, alas, not all minds can be convinced, and I respect your difference in opinion. You are also free to like and subscribe if you so wish. In any case, I hope you have a great day, and happy gaming.